Hey everybody, Jeff here with a new episode of the My Impossible podcast. Today we welcome my friend Jason Letter. Jason's from Morristown, New Jersey, is a public relations professional, and he's one of the team that is going up Mount Kilimanjaro next September of 2025, and to help me in my wheelchair do that mission. Who Jason is to me is impact. He is thinking about impact in everything he does. And I should say who also Jason is to me is fun. He has an amazing laugh. And when you combine those two things, impact and fun, it's just to be with him is energy and energizing. In this episode of the podcast, he takes us into his story. He starts on March 10th, 1999, and shares with us his impossible. You're going to be glued to this episode with Jason as he shares his story. Jason Letter, it is phenomenal to have you on the show. I am so excited for this time together.
It is absolutely great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And with that, what's your impossible?
My impossible changes on a pretty regular basis, I think. But I guess a lot of this goes back to my childhood, really. So we didn't grow up with a tremendous amount of money. I'm the son of two teachers, but they're both very active in our local church. So they kind of instilled a sense of service and gratitude in us from a very young age. My father was in AA for 30 years, but when he passed away. So I always saw some different levels of service and different levels of what people were experiencing with their impossible. My mother was always very active in Special Olympics, and even when I was a kid. So that started everything from the beginning. But when I went to college, I wanted to be on that economics and finance train. I wanted to go and make the big money and do the Wall Street thing. And I was working for Salmon Smith Barney at the time, and I had a really good opportunity coming up summer of my junior year to go and actually work in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That spring break, my girlfriend at the time and several of my friends, we all went up to Canada skiing. And on March 10th, 1999, I broke my neck. And the first hospital we went to.
Okay, so stop. Tell us more about that. Tell us more about what all happened.
All right. So for anybody who skis, the big thing that they say is if you're on the chairlift and you're saying this is my last run, you should already be done. So this was just the time where it's just the boys. It was just me and my college roommate. We're skiing all day. We're having a lot of fun. I was pretty heavy at the time. I was probably 295 pounds at the time. And, we had a great day skiing, and we're young and dumb, 20 years old or whatever. And we're looking forward to having Cuban cigars that night. That was the thing. We're in Canada. We're going to be able to go out and get some Cuban cigars and actually buy beer legally. It was going to be a fun thing. So we skied all day, and we had a lot of fun. We'd done some great trails and great paths through this magical mountain up in Canada called Mount Tremblant. And, we're getting towards the end of the day, mid-afternoon, and we get on that chairlift, and, we're sitting there like, which slope should we do? It's probably our last run of this whole trip. Maybe we'll get one more day, and if we're lucky. And we decided to do one of these big looping, trails that kind of covers the whole mountain. It's long, but it's easy, was the plan. About halfway down that slope, we came up on a little jump. It wasn't big. And, decided to take a run at it because, again, young, dumb, and cocky. So I went down first, and when I hit the jump, my skis came out from underneath me. And, I tucked my chin to my chest to try to roll myself forward, but I didn't realize how far I had already tilted back. And what had happened is I actually landed on my neck on solid ice, vertical, and my skis went vertical and parallel through that ice. It was stuck in the snow past the binding. I hit and rolled over. So I'm face down on the mountain. I can't move. I can't see. I can barely breathe. Don't really hear anything. Don't know how long that was. Still, really. My college roommate, my buddy Ryan, comes whipping down the mountain and skis right next to me. Gives me a little shake, and everything sort of came back, and I just rolled over. I'm I'm laying there on the mountain, and are you all right? That was pretty ugly. I was like, I think I'm fine. I just need a few minutes. He's like, I'll go get that toboggan thing. And I was like, no, just wait. Let's just chill for a minute. So we laid there together on the mountain for 20 minutes or so. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm good to go. And I stood up and I fell over because I thought I broke my left femur. The pain was so intense in my left femur. I was like, I think I broke my leg. I think I broke my femur. And he's like, I'm getting the toboggan, man. I was like, nah, don't do it. We're going to be fine. Just get me down to the mountain. We'll work this out later. So he literally skied next to me as I was leaning on him because I couldn't put any weight on my left leg. I got down to the bottom of the mountain, which was a silly mistake. Definitely should not have done that. First mistake was getting on that trailer for the last run. The second mistake was skiing down. Third mistake was probably, he's like, all right, let's get you back to the condo that we were staying in. I said, I can do that. Just get me to the shuttle bus. I'll be fine. You go get the Cuban cigars. We'll have fun at the hot tub tonight later. We'll grill some stuff. We'll make it a night. Don't worry about it. I'll just rest it off. So I sat on the shuttle bus that was taking us back to the condo that we were staying in for 10, 15 minutes, nothing crazy. And I got off the shuttle bus. I fell over again because I just couldn't walk. And we're about 150 yards from our front door of that condo. So I just crawled into the condo, crawled to the condo, crawled in, crawled upstairs, crawled into the bed I was staying in, and just fell asleep. And it was a good 6 or 8 hours later that my girlfriend at the time, she came up and she's like, I heard you took a pretty nasty spill. Are you all right? You've been sleeping for quite a while. And I said, I think I might have broken my neck, and pretty sure I broke my femur. And like any normal person, especially in their 20s, would have said at that point in time, she said, if you broke your neck, you'd be dead. If you broke your femur, you'd be screaming your head off. And I was like, I'm gonna need to go to the hospital. We're gonna need to get this checked out. So she called ski patrol, she called the mountain. All the ambulances had left for that time. So our option was to take a taxi cab. So we took a taxi cab about 90 minutes away to the nearest hospital. Get into the hospital, get the wheelchair to pull me into the hospital the whole night, and had the same conversation with the triage desk and the doctor that was attending that day. And same response: broke your neck, you'd be dead. Broke your femur, you'd be screaming. I was like, gonna need some x-rays. So they had to put 50-pound weights in each of my hands to pull my shoulders down, because by that point in time, my shoulders were just pinned basically permanently in my ears at that point in time. So they were able to pull my shoulders down enough where they could x-ray. And the doctor came out and he said, I got good news and bad news. I said, all right, well, it's the good news. It didn't break your leg, but you did break your neck. I was like, all right, well, what do we do now? And he was asking a bunch of questions, like, how'd you get here? And we were poor college kids, so we had actually taken the train up. And he's like, oh, you'll be fine. I'll just put you in one of those foam roller neck braces. You can get it checked out when you get home, but you'll be fine in a couple of weeks. It's only about a 15% compression on that one vertebrae. And I was like, I think my girlfriend at the time, and we're looking at each other, we should probably get a second opinion on that one, just for our own sense of self. And his response was, I'm gonna have to transfer you away to a hospital. It's like 2 hours away in Montreal. And I said, that's fine, let's do that. And what he had done then at that point in time, now that they knew there was a break, they strapped me to the gurney. So they literally strapped me down across the chest, across the legs. But the only neck brace they had available at that time was for somebody who was probably 4 or 5 times my size. I don't know if it was like an NFL player or whatever. It was really, really hard, big plastic neck brace that they readily admitted was too big for me. So they strapped that in, they taped my head down, get me in the ambulance, and we're traveling through the mountains of Canada at this point in time. So this hard plastic neck brace is just rubbing against the back of my skull. And it actually cut a line almost through my skull. In the back, there's a big knot on the back of my head. That's a fun conversation piece for those who want to ask about it. But halfway through that trip, I kept saying, like, this is really hurting. And they're like, you're fine. It's just the mountains. It'll be fine. My girlfriend's looking at me. She's like, something's not right. I was like, something's really not right here. She put her hand in there. She came out, it was just covered in blood. So they shoved a towel in there. And by the time we got there, the entire back of my shirt at that time was soaked in blood. So you could say things were going great at that point in time. We get into that hospital, St. Leclerc in Montreal, and straight up dumb luck. There was a spinal surgeon who had just finished his surgery there. He's one of the top 3 in the world at that time. He just came and looked at my x-rays, and he had a very different response. He said, I have good news and bad news. I said, yeah, I know I didn't break my leg. He goes, oh, I'm not looking at that x-ray. He goes, you definitely broke your neck, but if I don't do surgery in 72 hours, you're going to die. So at that point in time, we're, getting my parents on airplanes, getting everybody up there. We're in Canada. It's free healthcare. We got to get this figured out. We're like, hey, can we medical transport down to the US? How do we do this? Can't medical transport. That's not covered by insurance. We fight with insurance for a couple of days. And the reason was the first hospital had read the compression of C5 as 15%. What it was actually 50%. And the way they were describing it to me, broken French and absolutely broken English and absolutely no French on my side, was basically if you take a 2x4 and you drill a 1-inch diameter hole in there and you put a glass tube in there, that's like your spinal cord and your vertebrae. And what had happened is my spinal cord compressed down and broke outwards, which is the only reason I didn't die on the mountain. It didn't sever the spinal cord that way. But all those little pieces of bone fragments were just slowly going to sever that spinal cord over the next couple of days. And was like, okay, this is becoming far more serious at this point in time. So my parents get up there. It's about 48 hours before we can get into surgery. And we're preparing for the worst, but trying to remain positive. They wheel me in to the surgery, and they come right back out. They look my mother basically in the eye and said, "You're probably gonna die here, just so you know. And if not, you're most likely looking at a quadriplegic of some sort. This is a really serious situation." So my parents are out there dealing with that. And it's important to note that my mother's one of 11 children, so she's seen every injury possible and nothing can phase her. My father was an EMT at the time, a volunteer EMT, so he's literally seen everything. The difference is my mother can handle her children in pain like that. My father could never actually really handle it. So I knew my father wasn't going to be able to be too strong at that point in time. But I knew I was in trouble when I saw my mother cry. I was like, this is where this is bad. She's crying. We're on the ropes here. We're truly on the ropes. So when the doctor came out and said that they have to deal with that, just processing that in Canada by themselves, and no news coming for hours. So I'm in surgery for about 8 hours at this point in time. And the doctor comes out and says, he's going to live, but I still don't think he's going to walk. So more to come. We probably got another 6 or 8 hours. So a little bit of hope. They go back in, doctor goes back in, and it's about a 16-hour surgery. And so when I wake up, I'm everybody's seen the halos that people wear with neck injuries. My halo is a little bit different. It was bolted into the side of my head and directly into the wall. So I couldn't move. And they had gone in to do the surgery through the front of my neck. And the reason they did that way is because they had to take this much bone out of my hip to actually create a new vertebrae for C5, which is really cool when you hear about it later on. But it's a little bit awkward because your neck actually rotates on C4, C5, and C6. So they literally sucked C5 out with a tube. They made a new vertebrae out of my hip, and then they fused 4, 5, and 6 together. So when they went in through here, that closes your vocal cords and everything. So I couldn't talk for days. So I was just laying there, not really knowing what's going on. A lot of drugs going in at that point in time. No food going in yet by any stretch of the imagination. Sugar and salt water in the arms was about it. And they would come in about every half hour for the next 3 days to do a neurological test. And the response was always the same. Like, they couldn't believe that they were still feeling in my extremities. I was becoming weaker again because of the food and the drugs, but there was sensation there. And that was really helpful for them. Every once in a while, they have to unbolt me from the wall and go take another x-ray, make sure everything was still staying in place there. And so what became more fun is about a week later, a week into this, they came to take the halo off to put me back into a normal traditional neck brace. Now I still can't talk. And now at this point in time, I haven't eaten in 10 days, 12 days. I'm very weak, very tired. And the woman who came in, she starts cranking the screws to the right. And I can barely move at this point in time. So my eyes start bulging out, and my mother and father are there, and they're, something's wrong. Something's wrong with him. I'm like, no, he's fine. He's fine. He's just tired. Start crying my eyes out. And they're like, something is really wrong. No, he's just happy to be getting this off. He's just happy to not be bolted to the wall. He's just happy about this. And like, no, something's wrong. And nothing happened until blood started coming out of both sides of my head. She would stop like cracking the screws directly into my skull at that point in time. So her response at that point in time was, oops. And then she took it off, and, you know, cleaned up my wounds and put the new stuff on. And again, I laid there for another week or 10 days, just very, very, very weak. Not being able to do anything. Again, not eating. This comes into play a little bit later. So the first round of something that I thought was genuinely impossible was the doctors weren't going to let me go home until I could walk one flight of stairs. Obviously assisted with cane and all of that. So it was a couple of weeks up there, and my mother, God bless her, she stayed with me the entire time. She maybe slept 45 minutes a night in the chair next to my bed. She would go back to, there's a convent that the hospital worked with where didn't have a tremendous amount of money. They were put up in this convent. So my father would sleep there. My mother would go there and shower and come back, and they'd be there with me the whole day. But my mother and I at night, we would literally hobble down very, very slowly on a walker to find this flight of stairs. And I remember sitting there that first night with my mother, just sitting on this bench, just crying, because there was just no way that those stairs were in my future. It just wasn't going to happen. And there's not a lot of physical therapy or anything that you can do at this point in time. Again, because the hole in the hip was still very much healing. And the neck, they're saying, don't do physical therapy because now your neck's rotating on two vertebrae that's not supposed to. So all you're going to do is just wear away at those other vertebrae. So we're just figuring this all out over time. And, you know, we would get to the point where I would get to the stairs and we would sit for 2 hours. I would do one stair, come back, go back, try again a couple hours later, do it. I'll never forget when we finally got there. There was tears of joy from me, my mom, my father was there at that point in time. And it was like, okay, we could finally go home. Because we didn't speak French and there wasn't a lot of English. I have an aunt who spoke some French and she lived in Florida. So we would call her every once in a while to liaise with the doctors and nurses. But when we got home, I remember seeing my sister. She broke into tears because, not because I was alive, not because I was there, but because I'd gone from, like I said, about 295 pounds down to about 111. So I had lost the vast majority of my body mass, my body weight. You could see almost every bone in my neck. I'd gone from a 17.5-inch neck to a 12. And it was like, all right, what are we going to do with school? Because school is still going. So my mother started making calls to the school. Most of the teachers were pretty like, okay, we get it. Like, whatever. If he wants to finish the semester, you can come back and you could take, the finals and see how he does. Or you could just, bow out of the entire semester. And we decided, like, let's try it. Like, I made the decision. I wanted to go back. I wanted to be in school. I wanted to see my friends and be a part of all of that. And it was all but one professor, my marketing professor, Dr. David Paul, who did not believe this story from my parents at all. So when I got back to school and I'm on my cane, big neck brace, weighing maybe 130 pounds at this point in time, I walk into his office and he just turns and goes, "Oh, that wasn't a lie. Okay, let's figure this out. Let's talk about marketing. Let's figure this out." Ended up, passing that semester. It's just the best that we can say. But I had to give up that Chicago Mercantile Exchange dream. Musama Smith Barney at that point. So we called a family friend of mine from the church that we were going to at that point in time. And I was like, "Is there an internship or something I could do there?" He's like, "Yeah, what were you thinking about?" And it was always economics and finance, This gentleman was a very, very, very large commercial real estate investor, builder, a lot of money in that family. He goes, "That is not you." He goes, "I've known you your entire life. Yeah, you need to get into something else. Public relations." He goes, "I think you should start there. I'm going to turn you onto my PR agency." At the time, so I interned there that summer, and sort of everything changed from that point in time. My whole career trajectory changed. My career path changed. And that's actually right after that summer when I could walk, for lack of a better word. It took me about 6 months to really get off the cane and really learn how to walk, and much longer to learn how to like run or exercise or anything along that line. I got very, very involved in Special Olympics and coaching Special Olympics at that point in time. Got to see a whole different level of impossible. Coached Special Olympics for probably 15, 16 years. Again, partially driven by my mom opening that world to me, but really stayed with it because of the kids and the people. Met really amazing parents who go through a different level of hell and a different level of impossible every single day. Because you got to admit, you got to realize some of these kids that we're working with are in their 40s, so the parents, could be in their 80s. It's a lot to deal with somebody with the basically the mental capacity of a toddler or a 5-year-old at that point in time. So being able to give those parents a couple hour break to go out and play some golf or do some basketball or something was great. I mean, the love that came back from that was something that continued to sort of fuel a lot of the good work and such that I do, and start to figure some things out. So there's a lot of aha moments of I'm alive, which is great. We probably shouldn't waste that experience. We probably shouldn't go and do just that economics and finance thing. We should probably look at how you put some more of that good energy back and realize, why we're on this planet and what we can do for others. And that was sort of the real jumping off point for me to go out and find new things and find new ways to be a part of this.
So I don't know if it was a moment or a season of time, but I would imagine during your recovery, there was moments when you doubted, physically speaking, I don't know what, I don't see, I just don't see how life is ever going to be what it used to be. Can you take
it's almost yeah, it still happens actually to this day. So yeah, it's a great question, because everybody always asks, like, what was the real fallout, now that you've recovered. So I lost 15% rotation on my neck, 15 to 20, which it's significant. But the best way I describe it is if I go to gargle water, I have to really truly arch my back, and if I turn my head too far to this, left or right, I'll start seeing stars. And it still to this day, it always feels like you have to crack your neck. Like if anybody's ever cracked their neck, it's literally exactly what it feels like, pretty much 24 hours a day at this point in time. And when we finally got to meet with a doctor here, one of the top spinal surgeons in the U.S., to really go through everything that had happened, he went through all of the CAT scans, MRIs, X-rays, and he kept saying over and over again, he's like, you're pretty much dead in all of these. This is not a normal thing that you have gone through. So we, again, would continuously ask about physical therapy and, how do we alleviate some of this discomfort? And he's like, you're not going to, it's not in the cards for you. This is how you're going to feel. And more importantly, the more you wear away at those other two vertebrae, the more likely you are to have more surgery, maybe around the time you're 45 or 50, which would fuse 3 and 7, which would create a 50% loss of rotation on your neck. So that's always been looming through my head. So fast forward, decade plus later, had met my wife, and she'd heard the story 1,000 times, and we'd been married for a little while. And it was one day she was just looking at me. She's like, something's pretty off here, man. And I was like, what? She goes, you're turning with your entire upper body. She goes, the head is not turning. She goes, when you turn, it's a full body rotation. And I don't think that's right. I think you need PT. And I was like, no, I went through the whole, no, I can't do it story. And she's like, let's go. Things have changed in the world of healthcare. So we went back to the doctor, same doctor. And he goes, yeah, I think we can actually do some PT for you now, because what's happening is scar tissue has built up around where that fusion was done. And it's just continuing to grow. And that's why you're having limited rotation. and all that. And I go, okay, so you said we couldn't do PT. Like, this is not the PT that you were thinking. This is more, how do we break up that scar tissue and how do we do some other, mobility things? And I said, okay. Got the prescription. My sister's a neighbor and a good friend of ours at the time was a good PT guy. And I was like, can I come to you? And he goes, you can. This is going to be an adventure. And I'll never forget that first day. So I get there, he puts a heating pad around my neck for 20 minutes, kind of loosening it up, a little bit of light shoulder stretching. He put his hand on my shoulder, his hand on my head, and he just ripped. And you could hear the scar tissue in there just breaking up. And the pain was the most intense pain, including March 10th, 1999, and anything thereafter that I'd ever felt in my entire life. I just remember screaming and like, that was the worst thing ever. How could you do this? And his response back to that was, that's not the worst thing ever, because I have to do the other side, and now you know. So, I was PT 3-4 days a week for a good 6 months. But it got me back to that 15% rotation. So again, it's almost every day there's some subtle reminder. Again, I'll turn my head too quick. I was driving a pickup truck at the time. I couldn't drive the pickup truck. I had to give that pickup truck to my father and take his car because the line of sight and the views and the angles. There's always just some subtle reminder there that, like, hey, you're still sort of broken, but you're kind of kicking ass at the same time. So keep going and realize it could be a whole lot worse. So every time I have this conversation with almost anybody, I say the same thing. It's way better than the alternative. Everything that I got going on right now, way, way better than the alternative scenarios that had originally been thrown out to me. So yeah, it's a daily reminder. But every once in a while, there's some key events where it's like, you know what, get back, check it, and then how do you take that energy that we have to go and do something else?
I'm thinking about a moment in my story that really shifted things, because after the wheelchair, I was active, I worked out, I even swam, but it wasn't until I did that OCR last May of 2023, when it felt like the possible had become possible. Yeah. Again.
Perfect.
And again, you were doing PT, you were living, you were by this time, graduated, married, but wherever it came, what was the moment, despite how active and engaged in life and doing stuff and recovered you were, do you remember, is there a moment when it felt like it was the aha, like the impossible is now possible?
I think there's several again. So as I mentioned, probably 295 when I got to Canada, 111 when I got home from Canada. But then years of not doing anything. I ballooned up to 310 pounds. I carried it really well though, Jeff. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell. It was a good 310. I wasn't an ugly 310 pounds, but got up to that weight. When you see that scale tick over the 3 number, it was a thing. So I had different friends and different groups, some of which are joining us on Kilimanjaro, that different weight issues, different health issues, but we started working out. And I remember doing, with my friend Megan, we ended up both training as much as we could. We did a half marathon. It was like, hey, okay, I could do this. I can, that's something that was never, ever going to happen. I remember doing the first full Spartan race, again, with a lot of the guys that are going to Kili. And that was the hardest thing I'd ever done. That was a 9-mile race, and I'll never forget how hard that was. But it was like, I could, it just turns out that the human body is a really amazing thing. The human soul is even more impressive. The human brain is incredible. Like, what else is out there? So there was always a new level of, okay, what is it? But also knowing myself and knowing my history, if there wasn't something that I was training for, if there wasn't something that was on the calendar, I'm eating unhealthy food. I'm probably drinking too much alcohol. I'm being too lazy and just, enjoying life too much. But then finding new ways to, see a new hurdle, get over that new hurdle, and see what else what else is out there was always great. But then when we got, teamed up with More Hearts and Scars, and we did that first one that I was a part of out at Blue Mountain, like that was one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of. Again, all of the Special Olympic stuff, all the other charity work that I've done, that was one of the coolest things I've ever actually been a part of. Because the whole mountain knows what's going on. It's a huge, wonderful experience. Seeing what you personally and physically had to go through on that day. Seeing a group of people who weren't necessarily what you call a team literally become a team in the immediate and act that way for several hours. It was such a cool thing. And it was just like, there is so much more that we can do here. So, I look at the My Impossible project, and I look at what we're trying to do with Kilimanjaro as that's a big, wonderful thing. But then there's so many other areas where I've seen different levels of impossible that to me are always like, we can do something here. We can all do something here. There's always something to do, because after I got, once I first started my professional career, my email signature always was never say never, because you just never know what's going to happen. Everything can change in a blink of an eye. Everything can change in a matter of seconds, for the better or the worse. And it's just, you can never say that that's never going to happen, because it could, it will.
Yeah. You've mentioned loads of names as you've shared the story. Your mom and dad very pointedly, and your wife, and it even talked about the Spartan experience. As you reflect on this journey since March 10th, 1999, what's the role for you when you hear me say the word community?
I think, if it takes a village, takes a community, however you want to phrase it. I think for a zillion reasons that we'll never get into on this podcast, the world has changed dramatically. And there is a lot of anger and hatred and such out there. None of us are getting off this rock alive. Believe whatever you want after the fact, but nobody's getting off this rock alive. And it's, my personal philosophy after all of what I went through is, let's figure out how to leave it a little bit better than we found it. And I've seen the power of community in so many different areas. Again, part of it from my upbringing with my parents. So our church was very active in some rural parts of Maine and Appalachia. We would go and build houses, when we were in high school in the summer, big group would go up, and that was the thing. After college, my mother took me, again with the church, down to build houses in Ecuador. So the small church in Baskin Ridge, New Jersey, that could build all these homes and do all these repairs within the U.S. was amazing. The same church that could then send a group down and we'd go and build a bunch of houses down in Ecuador. To be able to see how a community of that sort can impact a different community within the country, outside of the country, but then being in country in Ecuador, which is the highest rate of homelessness in the world, and seeing how a community can help do that. So when I look at what we're trying to do here, and I look at what My Impossible can do, it's about igniting a variety of communities and multiple communities to understand what is going on and how you can make an impact. And there's different ways to make impact. This is what I've seen. Right, I'm going to take a half step back here. My wife's family's from India, and her father was successful enough in business where when he and I first met, and he was asking all about my family, and we go through the charity work on that side. He's like, "Yeah, it's great. We give money to the charity, and there's nothing wrong with either of those." And his whole philosophy that whole time was, the world needs people like your parents and you that want to go out and do that work. The world also needs people that can write checks to be able to support all that. I could not agree more. And that's how you start to look at a community. Is there's going to be the doers, the providers, those in need, the opportunity, but everybody has a different struggle that you can't see, that you don't really understand what they're going through. that you can actually make an impact on. And I'm a big believer in, you hear somebody's story, you got a friend for life. B, you make them feel needed and you help them. That's when the butterfly flaps and then there's a hurricane, 10,000 miles away. Like it's that whole sort of scenario. There's little motions that can create waves, and those waves can create movements, and the movements can create change. And we can hopefully, it might be cheesy, but like, again, I think we can all leave the world a little bit of a better place. And I've been, through my parents, fortunate enough to do a lot of charity work around the country and the globe at this point in time. And I know what little things can have a demonstrable impact. But then you can look here, and the questions I always get from people are, why do you do charity work in other parts of the world? It's like, well, because they need it just as much, and we're all one world sort of scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're a humble guy, Jason, and you don't lead with your story. and I'll just share with those that are listening, while I do know a snippet before today of your story, hearing it in a fuller way that you've shared it today, and knowing what I get to see and observe in you, it is truly a story of the impossible made possible. It is extraordinary. I mean, again, for those that are listening and watching, I worked out with you yesterday morning. It was not an easy workout. That was impossible, but made possible. So when you share your story with those that are willing to listen and want to know your story, and for those that are listening to it here, what do you hope the impact is?
I truly do hope that people understand life is short. Life is very short. I hope the impact of everything that we're trying to do and everything that I have done is that I want to have us all help create a movement that makes things better. Because the way I fell in love with obviously My Impossible before it was even a thing, but is that everybody has that different level of what impossible is. For some, it's doing a race. For some, it's eating. For some, it's a basic education. For some, it's human rights. For some, it's just basic healthcare. There's just so many different areas where things are impossible for different people. Hell, on the corporate side, if you look at it, some people I work with some brilliant people that can talk to you for hours, but the second you hit record, they clam up. So there's so many varieties of what impossible is. It doesn't have to be climbing Kilimanjaro. That's a great kicking off point for everything. But the communities that we'll be in while we're in Tanzania, for them, it's food. For them, it's water sometimes, just water. So it's what are those areas, and how do we just take everything in the communities that we all live in and work in, and survive and succeed in, and take that to be able to literally drive a new movement forward that is to leave a better impact, to let us all be better to ourselves and each other, in order to just realize that we're all here together, and there's opportunity here. Like, it doesn't have to be so insane as it is. You can, with the minorest little thing, you can change somebody's world. And I'm working on a paper with a friend of mine right now, on how you can change. This is very basic. Forgive the tangent here, but you can really change the world with like 6 or 8 words. Please, thank you, I'm sorry. And I always stress that in terms of like, how do you write an email to somebody at this point in time, or how do you write a text message? Because one line, there's no emotion in there. So when you take that and then you expand that out to how do you interact with somebody who's different than you? How do you interact with a different community? How do you interact with whatever? And to put an finer point on that, like I was talking to one of our HR leaders today, and she's Asian descent. She's first generation. She's like, when I grew up, if I brought the food that my parents made to school, the kids would have said, what is that, weirdo? She goes, now when my daughter brings that food, they go, can I try some? Can I have a little bit of that? Can I try a little bit of that? Like there's that curiosity. And that's a shift that's been made in one generation. It's like, how much of a shift could we make if we were identifying what people considered their impossible and helped activate it to make it their possible? If we could do that in a generation, what would this look like for our grandkids and great grandkids at this point?
Love it, man. Jason, you're a gift. You're a gift to me. You're a gift to the world. And I'm just so grateful for your story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure, brother. Looking forward to more.